Hello, beautiful nerds. I'd like to thank GitHub for having me here. It's been really great. I've enjoyed my day. So.
U Street Escalator, September 27th, 2011.
I like that sound. That's an escalator at a DC Metro stop. The escalator has a plastic element on the side of each metal step, so it stops it from rubbing against the metal siding. And then there's a lubricant to keep it all running smoothly. But when it rains or snows, the lubrication wears off, and it sounds like this. Or it sounds like this. That's the escalator at Farragut North. It kind of sounds like whales mating. Yeah, I'm going to go with whales mating on that one. So brace yourself. This is the sound of the escalator at Columbia Heights. That makes me so happy. That was best described by Chris Richards, he's the music critic for the Washington Post, as an aviary of chrome-throated ravens greeting you as you descend to your workday. All of these escalators are basically identical. They have the same basic design, but they each broke in their own way. And the way that they broke gives each escalator its own character. Now, most people find the screeching and skronking of broken escalators really quite annoying, but once you accept that it is not going to change, and trust me, in the DC Metro system, it is never going to change, you can find pleasure in the accidental music of imperfect escalators. Someone even posted a homemade plaque that both makes fun of and exalts in the ridiculous moaning of the Farragut North escalator. It reads,
Whale Song Escalator. This escalator has been adjusted to emulate the pre-dawn calls of our deep-sea friends, the whales. Follow the serenade while you ascend to the surface, and enjoy the day.
It's the stories about the unexpected interactions between people in the built environment that I love to tell on my podcast, 99% Invisible. The little innovations, the moments of everyday genius, and even the design failures that tell us who we are through the lens of the things we build. This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars. You're going to mess up my timing if you keep clapping. 99% Invisible is a radio show and podcast about architecture and design, two disciplines for which the visuals tend to be very, very important. But being constrained solely to audio reveals something critical about how we can communicate the importance of design in everyday life. People have different opinions about what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is tacky, and so on, but stories are universal, at least if you tell them right. So I used to work at a radio station called WBEZ in Chicago, and every day I walked past this building. This is an office building in the Montgomery Ward complex. It was designed by Minoru Yamasaki. He also did the World Trade Center towers and the Pruitt-Igoe housing complex. And I have to admit, I rarely looked up at this building. I passed it nearly every single day. And part of the reason I ignored it is that Chicago is so architecture rich, it's kind of hard to stand out as a skyscraper in Chicago. But even when it got new blue-green tinted glass in 2006, I just never even bothered to crane my neck to look at it. But then someone told me why this building has these thick concrete corner supports on the building. First of all, it kind of opens up the floor plan of the building. But more importantly, to me anyway, the Montgomery Ward Company prided itself on having an egalitarian hierarchy, and they didn't want the vice presidents fighting over who got the corner office. So they made a building. It was impossible to get a corner office. So it's now been converted into condos. It's called the Montgomery. And I bet the developers hate those thick concrete columns with every fiber of their being, wishing that there was a corner condo to sell that they can't possibly sell. But that is the reason why I love this building, and so therefore I win. That story has stayed with me for years, and I think of it as one of my most favorite buildings. I mean, it's not my favorite, but if you ask me what my favorite building is, this dumb building pops into my head. And it's a thing that I rarely bothered to look at when I passed it nearly every day. But I've learned to appreciate its aesthetics more and more as I told that story again and again. And that's why I contend that story is the universal language of design, even more than aesthetics. No, don't get me wrong, I love pretty things, but prejudice and bias and ignorance, they just get in the way of me loving a brilliant structure with a great story to tell. Sometimes the story can make things more ugly, and not to get all dark on you, but that is the main story I'm going to tell you today. It's going to be a good kind of dark. It's going to be like a Dark Knight Returns kind of dark, not a bad kind of dark like Batman versus Superman kind of dark. But brace yourself for that. But here's the deal. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of crack open an episode of my show, 99% Invisible, and I'm going to reconstruct it in front of you. So when I press a button over here,
S for sound.
it's going to make a sound. And so whenever you hear a sound or a voice or a piece of music, anything besides me talking on this microphone, it's because I pressed a button.
Sound.
Got it? All right. So I'm going to have a few pictures up here, but remember, this is radio, so you can close your eyes. You can lie down in the aisle for all I care. You don't have to look at me. I didn't get into radio to have people stare at me. But just relax and enjoy it. This is 99% Invisible. I'm Roman Mars. Around the corner from our office in beautiful downtown Oakland, California, is DeLauer's newsstand. It has been there since 1907. For people who live and work downtown, it is central to our existence. Everyone goes there to buy drinks, lottery tickets, little packs of fruit-flavored cigarillos, and occasionally even a newspaper.
163.
And as welcoming as DeLauer's is, at least to me anyway, about 8 months ago, it became clear that they didn't want people to spend time on the sidewalk outside of the store, and here's how you can tell. DeLauer's started playing really loud classical and adult contemporary music through the speaker outside, and although I still see a fair number of people hanging around in front of the place, the owner says it was not nearly as many as before.
Oh, big change. It was mess. They hung out outside, and they playing dice on the street outside the door, and it was crazy. But now it helps us a lot. Even the customer telling us they see the change on the street here. I'm the owner of DeLauer's newsstand. My name is Fasil Lama.
When you have classical music, people who are young and cool don't really hang out there. So that's a way to deter teenagers.
That's Selena Savage.
And I am co-author of the research project about unpleasant design.
Playing classical music on loudspeakers is an example of what Selena calls unpleasant design.
Unpleasant design is something that works well at deterring certain behaviors and certain uses from particularly public spaces.
Along with her partner Gordon Savovich, Selena collects unpleasant designs and reveals them to us.
Unpleasant design was here since we started designing public space or since we started designing cities.
Unpleasant designs are meant to exert a kind of social control in public by targeting people who spend a lot of time in public spaces, especially the young and the homeless. And the designs often end up pushing the so-called undesirable people out of one space and into another. Music is only one method for deterring teens from public space. In 2009, the BBC reported that the Nottinghamshire housing estates installed pink lighting to keep kids from congregating.
Pink lights, which would emphasize the skin, like blemishes on teenagers, which should result in teenagers not hanging out there. That's one of my favorite examples.
Mine too, although there's not a lot of evidence to prove how effective it is. Pink lighting that preys on teenagers' insecurity is funny and kind of devious, if a little far-fetched. Another more substantiated example of targeting and trying to eliminate undesirable behavior with light is the presence of blue lighting in public restrooms. I saw this in UK train stations quite a lot last time I was there.
Blue light of a particular color makes the veins slightly less visible.
She's saying veins there. She just says it really, really cool, veins. You can't see your veins through the skin, so it's hard to find a target if you're an intravenous drug user.
Then it became a very popular solution for all kind of publicly accessible toilets and even sometimes in buses. When your veins are not visible to you, you're obviously not going to be able to take any heroin.
According to Selena, lights are one of the original forms of public social control.
There was a bridge in a small town in Bosnia,
Specifically in the Kazbat of Visegrad, Bosnia, in the early 1900s.
where the Austrian government, who kind of annexed the country at that time, decided to implement street lighting, and that was very unpleasant to the locals, and the locals would destroy the light every night, and the government would reinstall it every morning. And so the idea that light is something unpleasant for free expression in public space is something that we completely forgot.
We've since become so habituated to public lighting that our primary experience with streetlights is that they deter criminal activity and make us feel safe. Unless you're someone who laments the lack of stars in the night sky or have an apartment window right next to a screamingly bright streetlight bulb, you might never view streetlights as unpleasant at all, which is one of the reasons why the Unpleasant Design Project wants to point it out, so that it gets recognized as being part of this overall design scheme that can take on much uglier manifestations.
Well, these studs may only be a few centimeters tall, but they've caused a big debate.
This is from a BBC News story in 2014. The reporter Nick Beek is pointing to an angry-looking set of spikes that were installed on a concrete floor in a small alcove at the entrance of an apartment building. The spikes are clearly meant to stop people from sitting or lying down there.
Is this a legitimate way to prevent rough sleeping and possible antisocial behavior, or are they a symbol of a heartless approach to homelessness?
I know the answer to that one. It's the second one.
That spiked a huge debate, and even the mayor of London reacted and said that they should be removed and that we should not address homeless people in this way.
The grocery chain Tesco also added spikes in areas outside of its entrance to one of the stores in central London in 2014. They were removed after days of public protest.
Generally, the debate was about the way we treat homelessness, and is that something that we just want to remove from a particular space, or is it something that we should somehow structurally address?
Spikes to stop people from sitting or lying down evoked a wide variety of reactions from the public.
The first time I saw someone lying here, a homeless couple actually, I didn't like it because I didn't like having to walk by them. That sounds very selfish. So when I saw those studs, I thought, good idea.
A lot of people are bothered by the presence of homeless people, but some are also alarmed by just how aggressive the spikes are.
It's almost looks harmful. You know, if you lie on those, you're going to get spiked. And so it sends that message, which I think is wrong.
It's worth saying that these spikes are not just in England. We have them in the US too. Outside of the office, in downtown Oakland, California, there's a window ledge that you naturally want to sit on, and sure enough, there are these black metal doorknob-looking things that keep you from resting there. And one of the things that makes these spikes or similar features so frustrating is that they're just there. They're not moving. There's no arguing with them.
You know, if you have a policeman who prohibits people from sleeping in a park, I think there is still some possible negotiation. And I think that's good. That's what society is about, the ongoing negotiation and ongoing change. But when we start using things that are immutable and unchangeable, like metal spikes, there is nothing that is going to change until they rust. I think that's the most important criteria for calling something unpleasant design. It is something that you cannot negotiate with.
We have all probably tried and failed to negotiate with one of the most common and aggravating forms of unpleasant design, public seating. Whether it's in a park or at a bus stop or in an airport, there are countless ways that designers have made it so you cannot get comfortable and most especially cannot lie down.
A classic is the bench with armrests in between, which of course let you rest your arm on, on the armrest, but at the same time they restrict any other kind of use than sitting upright. The only way this bench can be used is by 3 people sitting next to each other and not looking at each other, which is not the only thing you can do on a bench. Especially, it's not the only normal and legal thing you can do on a bench.
Selena thinks that limiting the way something can be used is problematic.
By attacking or addressing one particular problem, you actually generate many more problems and reduce complexity of possible behaviors in public space.
And it's not just dividers and armrests. In the Unpleasant Design book, they point out benches that are mounted so high that your feet can't reach the ground, and therefore they're uncomfortable after a short period. And they document an increased prevalence of leaning supports at bus stops, so you can rest them against them standing, but they do not accommodate sitting or sleeping. But the object that Selena considers the masterpiece of unpleasant design is the Camden bench.
Basically, it is a design solution to 22, I think, antisocial behavior problems. The only thing it does not deter is sitting.
The Camden bench, so named because it was commissioned by the Camden London Borough Council, is a strange, angular, sculpted, solid lump of concrete with rounded edges and slopes in unexpected places. A critic on Medium called Frank Swain called it the perfect anti-object. It's anti-sleeping because the shape makes it uncomfortable to sleep on. It's anti-drug dealing because there are no slots or crevices in which to hide drugs. It's anti-theft because the recesses near the ground allow people to tuck their bags behind their feet and away from would-be criminals. It's anti-skateboard because the edges and slope make it hard to grind on. It is anti-litter because there are no surfaces or crevices for litter to accrue. It's anti-graffiti because there's a special coating that repels paint. And I think most of those goals are completely noble, except for the sleeping and skateboarding. I don't really want those activities happening in the public spaces I go to either. But Selena finds this litany of anti-measures demoralizing.
It discourages 22 things. It encourages to sitting and sitting together. When we expect people to do bad things to the bench, before we think of anything good that people might do to this bench, I think that's a very sad approach to public space.
It's also a contagious approach to public space. There's a chapter in the Unpleasant Design book that's devoted to all the unpleasant designs that are used to thwart pigeons in cities. Anti-pigeon spikes and nets are everywhere, and even if you're like Selena and aware of these measures and skeptical about our war on pigeons, you might not have a choice whether or not to use them.
A week after we have published the book, we had a confirmation of this. We didn't even notice, but on the balcony doors, we actually had anti-pigeon spikes. And then, due to somebody hanging out on the balcony who was, a bit clumsy, and they destroyed these spikes on one side, and we didn't even notice that. Suddenly, the balcony was filled with pigeon shit.
Pigeons might not be overwhelming if the population is spread throughout the city, but the ubiquity of pigeon spikes concentrate pigeons in the few places where there are no spikes. And Selena argues that that's when the problem is created.
And that should not be the way to solve any kind of interest conflicts over a space. But yes, we immediately fixed our spikes.
There's always an aspect of coercion in design. Design is used to get you to buy things or to use your phone in a certain way, sometimes without you even being aware of it. And these pieces of hostile architecture are no different. Of course, there are ways for designers to fight back, too. The Soft Walks initiative has created a guerrilla furniture that can be attached to existing street infrastructure. The Archisuits project by Sarah Ross involves special outfits that allow users to overcome obstacles like bench armrests.
Design is something that is supposed to transmit a certain use of this object, otherwise it would have not been designed. However, I think it is very problematic when we start excluding people by design.
The reason we need a critical theory of unpleasant design is so that we can recognize the coercion that is taking place in our public spaces. We need to know when we're replacing human interaction and nuance and empathy with hard, physical, non-negotiable solutions.
And this is what we wanted to achieve with this book, to start the debate. There will always be people who believe this is a good way and people who think it's terrible, and we are somehow not extreme in our opinion. We're really the observers.
And now, you, everyone in this room, is an observer too. Whether you think a certain form of design is exclusionary but serves a greater good, or just hostile and offensive, it's important to be aware of the decisions that are being made for you, because most likely, unpleasant design is put there to make things more pleasant for someone just like you. Now, probably most of you don't design benches, but I think there's a lesson in unpleasant design for every designer and maker of anything. Ask yourself, when you make something, who are you excluding and why, and is it making the world a better place? And if you know the answer, go out there and do some good. Thanks. Appreciate it.